I don't want to waste your time or my time, so I'm going to jump right into the project. The part that I'm cutting right now is a blank for the key element of this sharpening jig, and that's what holds the chisels in place. There are 8 steps that I need to cut into this that are 1/16 of an inch deep and 1/8 of an inch wide, and I need 2 of these, but I'm going to cut both of them at the same time from this one block. And that makes the operation a lot safer because you're handling bigger material. And also because you're cutting both at the same time, both pieces are going to be exactly the same. Before I cut the steps, I'm going to change my blade to one that has flat teeth, so I'll get a nice flat bottom cut. And before any of this happened, I designed and 3D printed the depth gauge that you see here. And I need this to set the depth of cut. The first cut goes in 1/16 of an inch. I move the fence over 1/8 of an inch, raise the blade up another 1/16 of an inch, and make the next cut. And I'll do that over and over until I get all 8 steps cut. Final operation is to cut off the support piece that I left on the other side so that the cuts that I've made here will be a lot safer. Now I'm going to set my miter guide up to 25 degrees, 25 degrees being the primary grind angle on chisels. And I also use it for plane blades, and I'm using that to cut a scrap of plywood that will once again act as a guide so I can cut the ends of the blank at that 25-degree angle. Next, I need to cut these to length, and I'm going to use my mini table saw sled to do that. Now that I have the 2 pieces cut, you can see the way it's going to work here. They go together to form that step V. And the idea behind the step V is to make it so that you don't have to do a lot of loosening and tightening to put different size chisels in. Now I need to do one more operation on these, and that's to drill 2 holes. And those need to line up perfectly. And here's where I made a mistake. My holes weren't lined up exactly right. So what I had to do was drill them out slightly oversized with this bigger bit that I'm using here. And that created a problem that only showed up later on. The piece that I'm cutting now is a scrap of 1/2 inch plywood for the base. And one of those stepped holders gets glued onto that. And it can be a little bit tricky to clamp that. So I'm going to use the other piece as kind of a wedge here so that the clamp has parallel faces to press against. Now while that's drying, I'm going to make the paddle that the diamond plate goes in. And that's based on the size of the diamond plate that I have. And to hold that in place, I've cut these small strips of hardwood that I'm going to super glue in place, and they completely surround the stone and hold it so that it can't move. A little bit of sanding to clean it up, and now I need to drill 2 counterbores for rare earth magnets and also a 3/4 inch hole so that I can get my finger in there and push the plate out. I also need to use that super glue to glue those bolts in place so that they won't turn. Now I can show you how it's going to clamp a chisel. You put the other side in, put the chisel in the correct step. This happens to be a 1/4 inch chisel, so it's on the lowest one. And this is actually a 1 inch chisel. And you can see it fits in a higher step, and I didn't have to spread the jaws far apart. Also a 1.5 inch plane blade, and that fits in a step even higher. I need to make the uprights next, so I'm going back to my scrap wood closet for a piece that's the right size. And I should say that I'm designing this on the fly, but I'm also including measurements that I made up after I got the thing put together. and you can use those to build your own. Next, I need to cut a notch in the bottoms of these so that they'll fit onto the base. And I'm going to use my mini table saw sled once again to make that cut. And I'm going to tape both pieces together so I'm cutting them at the same time. Now that I figured out how long that base needs to be, I can cut that to length as well. And before I glue these uprights on, I want to mark that angle on there so that I can once again tape them together, this time using double-sided tape. I need to drill holes for the 1/2-inch dowels that will guide the paddle at the right sharpening angle. And as you can see, there are 2 of these. The lower one is at 25 degrees, and the upper one is at 30 degrees for a secondary bevel. A little more sanding and I can get those glued in place onto the base. I'm not going to use any fasteners here. And the next piece that I need to work on is the front leg, which is just a block of the same stuff that I made the uprights from. Get that glued on. And next I can cut those support dowels. Like I said, 1/2 inch, and they just slide right into those holes. To make it easier to hold the paddle, it needs a handle. So I'm going to make one from a scrap of oak and get that glued on. But I should say that if I have my time back, like if I were to do this again, I would glue that handle on a little bit further up rather than directly above the plate. And here's the way the paddle fits as it is now, but you can see there's no clearance for it to move side to side to use the entire surface of the diamond plate. So I'm going to make it less wide so that it can move back and forth. As you can see, it's all put together now, and I actually sprayed on some clear finish. But when I put a chisel in, I discovered the issue that I hinted at earlier. And the problem is that when you tighten the jaw with chisel in there, it tends to tilt up, like a gap forms underneath that jaw. And that puts the chisel at the wrong angle. So to try to fix that, I'm adding a spline to the front that's only glued in on the side that's fixed, and then the other side can move back and forth. And that helped, but it didn't completely solve the problem. As you can see here, the chisel is rocking as I tighten the wing nut. Now I could, and probably should have, remade the parts, but an easier fix is to drill a slot in the base for a screw that will hold that moving jaw down tighter to the base. And that worked well. Now when you load a chisel in here, it needs to stick out a little bit. I'm using a washer as a guide. And with the chisel in place, I can sharpen. I'm going to start with the 300 grit side of the diamond plate and work on that primary bevel to make it nice and flat. And to make it so that it won't move around so much, I'm going to add rubber feet to the bottom. So 300 grit for the first shot, and then I can flip that stone over and do 600 grit to make that more smooth. And that'll be the primary bevel, and you can see how perfect that is. Now I'm going to change it back to 300 grit and move it up to the upper dowel to give it a secondary bevel. And here you can see how that looks. So that was the 1/4 inch chisel. Now I'm going to put in a 1/2 inch chisel, start with 300 and work on the primary bevel and switch to 600 to smooth that off. Then back to 300 to do the secondary bevel, and then 600 again to clean that up. Not only is this fast and foolproof, it's also very clean. There's no oil or water involved. So I'm done with the 1/2 inch. I'm going to put in a 3/4 inch, and you can see that works in exactly the same way. Start with the primary bevel and then work on the secondary bevel. And the last thing I'm going to sharpen in this session is my block plane blade. I'm going to get the primary bevel nice and flat and even, but when I tried to do the secondary bevel, I discovered a small problem. Because of the angle I cut in the jaws, the diamond plate would be rubbing on the wood instead of the blade. But the fix for that is very easy. You just slide the blade forward enough so that it works. And I know you're probably saying that changes the angle, but no, that doesn't change the angle enough to worry about. Now, of course, doing that leaves a burr, and the way to get rid of the burr is to do the other side. And I'm just going to leave the diamond plate in the paddle to do that. The piece of wood that I'm putting in my tail vise is hickory, one of the hardest woods you can get, and I'm going to cut across the end grain. These can be taken further, of course. You can get a finer diamond plate and do a finishing pass on these, but for what I do, this is sharp enough.